Nations are scrutinizing a Chinese-made genetics test. The test is used on pregnant women around the world, and the company that produces it has ties to the Chinese military. When exactly did the CCP virus outbreak begin in Wuhan? A top epidemiologist reveals he first heard about it back in mid-December 2019, 2 weeks before it was reported to the World Health Organization. China's Three Gorges Dam sees a 23-year record high water level. Landslides strike China in at least 3 areas, destroying homes and killing several people along the way. NATO voices concerns about China's nuclear expansion, and a European country no longer wants its ambassador in China. This comes after a disagreement with Beijing over Taiwan's opening of a de facto embassy. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Several countries are scrutinizing a Chinese-made gene test. Reuters reports that 5 governments are examining the test. That's because the company that produces it has ties to the Chinese military. Chinese company BGI's test screens for genetic conditions like Down syndrome. It's marketed under the brand name Nifty. Over 8 million women have taken the test globally, and it's still being sold in more than 50 countries. Some doctors and clinics that promote the test told Reuters they were unaware the company has ties to the Chinese military. Health regulators from Canada, Germany, Australia, Estonia, and Slovenia voiced concern. They are asking the Chinese company to disclose how they use the women's genetic data. Reuters previously reported that BGI has been working with Chinese military hospitals. Their research includes strengthening Chinese soldiers and making their bodies suitable for fighting at high altitudes. They also conducted mass testing for pathogens. The U.S. top counterintelligence officer under former President Trump warned that Chinese biotech companies could be helping the communist regime collect other countries' citizens' healthcare data. He told CBS that the CCP has also likely stolen all personal data belonging to about 80% of all Americans. China in Focus previously aired a special report on China's ambitions to control the world's gene data. We include more details about Chinese company BGI in that report. A top American scientist says he heard about the CCP virus in Wuhan 2 weeks before Beijing issued its first warning. In a new Spike Lee documentary, Professor Ian Lipkin reveals he learned of the initial virus outbreak on December 15, 2019. That's almost 3 weeks before the World Health Organization reported the first case of the infection, which causes COVID-19, on social media. In the documentary, he didn't disclose where he heard the information. Lipkin is an infectious disease expert at Columbia University. He flew to China to investigate the outbreak early last year. His story undermines Beijing's official timeline for the CCP virus origin and resulting outbreak. At that time, China had said there were only 5 cases in Wuhan, a mega city home to 11 million people. Lipkin says the delay, combined with Beijing's refusal to admit human-to-human transmission early on, eventually brought on the pandemic's disastrous consequences. He also quoted his Chinese research team coworker, Professor Lu Jiahai. Lu said global virus spread could have been prevented with better early warning systems. China's longest river has reached a new level of flooding for the year, as months-long torrential rain continues to ravage southern China and threatens to further overload the river's Three Gorges Dam, China's largest power station. According to China's major river numbering regulations, when the inflow of the Three Gorges Reservoir reaches about 65,000 cubic yards per second, the floods are assigned a number. This is the first flood of the year to exceed that rate. And authorities declared a number 1 flood in the Yangtze River Monday. They reported the inflow of water to the Three Gorges Dam would be about 70,000 cubic yards per second. That exceeds the rate seen in China's 1998 floods, the country's worst floods in recent history. Due to the incessant rain, the upper reaches of the Yangtze River have all flooded. Officials in the region issued a notice warning the flood will affect 11 cities along the river. Flood damage is still taking its toll on southwestern China. Now, Sichuan province is recovering from a number of landslides sparked by even more heavy rain. The downpour started over the weekend, leaving some parts of the province submerged. With the ground saturated, landslides soon followed, causing damage in at least 3 areas. According to Chinese state-run media, more than 300 people from 100 houses have been evacuated. Some of these homes now buried beneath mud. At least 3 people died, though these figures can't be verified independently because of China's tight grip on information flow out of the country. Weibo, China's Twitter, just suspended 21 fan accounts for K-pop bands. The platform says it wants to curb irrational star-chasing behavior. NTD's Evelyn Lee spoke to an expert who says that the current clampdowns have one thing in common.
China's crackdown on celebrity culture is now targeting K-pop fans. Weibo, China's version of Twitter, announced that it suspended 21 fan accounts. The accounts were dedicated to various K-pop artists. Weibo says they showed irrational star-chasing behavior, something it firmly opposes. Instead, it promises to only promote rational star-chasing activities. Tang Jingyuan, a China analyst, says there are 2 main reasons why the regime is concerned with that.
The Chinese Communist Party is a political party that wants to control everything, including the minds of people. This is to say that what a person likes and dislikes, such normal expression of emotions, they all have to meet the needs of the party.
He says the other reason is that idolizing celebrities would inevitably dilute and weaken people's attention to the socialist ideology that the CCP promotes. A BTS fan club with over 1 million followers was the first account to be suspended. It had collected donations for a birthday gift for one of the BTS members. Later that day, Weibo announced that it would ban several other accounts as well, citing a government notice.
The CCP needs dedicated young people who are able to serve the party in any way it wants. It doesn't allow these teenagers to pursue the popular movement more than they support the party.
He says that celebrities have significant influence on China's youth, but the effect they have isn't necessarily in line with the goals of the CCP. Just days before, the Chinese National Radio and TV Administration banned what it calls sissy men and other abnormal aesthetics. One of the sections want to boycott things that are overly entertaining. It explains the need to put more emphasis on things like revolutionary culture and socialist culture. Tang says that the current crackdowns in China have a common denominator.
It's to prepare for the worst-case scenario, in case there is a decoupling between China and the United States. That's to say, they're preparing to enter into the internal circulation.
Earlier, party head of the CCP Xi Jinping called for national rejuvenation, with tighter CCP control of business, education, culture, and religion. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
The chip crisis is hitting China's auto industry harder. Many major producers have no choice but to cut their production in half. And experts say it's not likely China will become self-sufficient in chip production as Beijing had planned.
The microchip crisis in China's auto industry is getting worse. Many joint ventures and local car manufacturers are now forced to cut their production in half for a 3rd consecutive month. The list includes Volkswagen, Honda, Nissan, and local auto brand Xiaopeng Motors. According to the Wall Street Journal, the CCP virus outbreak in Malaysia is making matters worse. Malaysia is a critical link in the semiconductor supply chain, and the pandemic situation there is threatening global supply. The Chinese branch of Volkswagen is one of those suffering. Its flagship branch in Shanghai says most models are currently out of stock.
Because of the lack of chips, many models are out of stock. Almost all the sedans are gone now. If you book, the wait time will be at least 1 to 2 months. The price is too high now because of the short supply. No chips.
Beijing has an ambitious goal for chip production. That is, by 2025, 70% of all chips it uses will be made domestically. But U.S. action on China's major chip manufacturers is making that plan seem unlikely. The U.S.-China trade war put Chinese telecom giant Huawei on America's trade blacklist, while products from China's largest chipmaker, SMIC, are severely restricted. That's including the company's sub-10 nanometer chips. On top of that, China's once promising rival to U.S. chip producers, Tsinghua Unigroup, is facing bankruptcy.
At present, the global automotive semiconductor supply chain is still relatively in the hands of the major IDM manufacturers in Europe and the United States. So even if China has these relatively low-end processes, they may not be able to work for automotive applications as we expect. Most of their applications are in the communications or consumer segment.
Professor Lin Zhongnan from National Taiwan University says Beijing's crackdown on China's private sector and suppression of free speech make the goal mostly unachievable.
In such an environment, for science and technology innovation and research development, although it has strong state funding, I think the chances are still slim.
China is the world's largest vehicle consumer and manufacturer, but estimates say the country's economic performance may slow due to the chip crisis.
One of the biggest Chinese car companies in the world is hiring the former design chief from luxury car brand Bentley. Chinese car companies are notorious for copying and stealing designs of foreign car companies. But hiring an international designer could mean fresh designs. NTD's Phil Zhou has the story.
Top German car designer Stefan Seeloff is officially jumping ship from UK luxury car brand Bentley to Chinese car firm Geely. Seeloff has been the chief designer at Bentley for several years and previously worked at Audi and Mercedes. Geely is a top Chinese car firm that also owns brands Volvo, Polestar, and a 10% stake in Mercedes' parent company Daimler. But Chinese car companies are notorious for rolling out models that look like copycat models of Western car brands. For example, the Mercedes G-Class to China's Beijing Auto BJ80C, Porsche Macan to China's Zot-E SR9, and the Rolls-Royce Phantom to China's Geely GE Limo. Geely also partnered with Chinese tech giant Baidu on an electric car project and just hired a designer from U.S. car brand Cadillac. Seeloff will oversee designs for China's Geely and its electric car designs. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
The European country Lithuania no longer wants its ambassador to be in China. This comes after a disagreement with Beijing over Taiwan opening a de facto embassy in Lithuania. But the European country says its embassy in China is operating normally despite their recall. NTD's Don Ma has more.
Following a dispute with China over Taiwan, Lithuania has withdrawn its ambassador from Beijing. Lithuania's foreign ministry said on Friday that Ambassador Diana Miškovienė had been recalled from Lithuania's embassy in China. It says the embassy itself is operating normally. The move comes after China last month said it would withdraw its envoy in Lithuania, while demanding that Lithuania remove its ambassador in Beijing. The tension between the two nations started when Lithuania agreed to allow Taiwan to open a de facto embassy there under Taiwan's own name. The embassy is to be named the Taiwanese Representative Office. This is the first time the island's name has been used for one of its offices in Europe. Often, Taiwan's offices in other countries use the name Chinese Taipei. It's to avoid making a reference to the island itself and to avoid offending China. China claims Taiwan is part of its own territory and asserts that the democratically ruled island should not have diplomatic relations with other countries. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that Lithuania's move undermined China's sovereignty. The European country said it was disappointed with China's actions and says it stands ready to develop mutually beneficial ties with Taiwan. The de facto embassy is set to open in the fall. Last month, in a phone call with Lithuania's foreign minister, Secretary of State Antony Blinken expressed the U.S.'s support for Lithuania's expanding ties with Taiwan. On Friday, European ambassadors to China expressed solidarity with Miškovienė. Dozens gathered to take part in a joint photo with her as she left Beijing. Don Ma, NTD News.
NATO says it's concerned about China's nuclear expansion. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warned of China constructing new missile silos. At a Monday conference on arms control, Stoltenberg said China is expanding its nuclear arsenal in an unrestricted manner.
All of this is happening without any limitation or constraint, and with a complete lack of transparency.
The nuclear arsenal includes more warheads and a more sophisticated delivery system. In a message for Beijing, Stoltenberg said,
"As a global power, China has global responsibilities in arms control."
According to a study published in July by the Federation of American Scientists, or FAS, silos for nuclear missiles were found under construction in large areas in the northwestern region of Xinjiang. Shortly before that, the Washington Post reported that China began building over 100 new silos in Xinjiang's neighboring province, Gansu. FAS experts estimate China could have over 200 new missile silos in total, more than that of Russia and half as many as the U.S. As to nuclear warheads, FAS says China has around 350, and the U.S. and Russia each have 4,000 in stock. A former Philippines admiral is calling for a joint military exercise with Taiwan and Japan. He says it's necessary for all three nations to keep the Chinese regime's aggression in the Asian region in check. The three countries are also all important U.S. allies. The message comes as media report the communist regime has stepped up aggression in the region, sending even more aircrafts flying through Taiwan's air defense zone. The Chinese regime claims Taiwan is part of mainland Chinese territory and has repeatedly threatened to take it over by force. That tension has only been increasing over the past year. Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines are part of what's called the First Island Chain. It's a series of islands that blocks the Chinese regime from casting its naval power further into the Pacific and from getting closer to U.S. territory. Therefore, the chain is seen as critical to U.S. national security. The Philippines admiral says the U.S. may not be able to block China's expansion by itself and may need help from allies. He suggests that the three Asian countries build an integrated strategy to respond to further action from Beijing. Japan and the Philippines have conducted joint exercises before, but not with Taiwan. That's because most countries don't recognize the self-ruled island as its own nation, and for fear of angering China, never invited Taiwan to join joint military actions. Taiwan can currently only join rescue exercises or other civil activities. The British government has ordered a review of a proposed takeover of a UK company that makes a super material called graphene. They say there are national security concerns, and there are also Chinese interests involved. The takeover is led by a Chinese academic.
Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng has ordered a review of a proposed takeover of a graphene company in Wales due to national security concerns. The Perpetuous Group supplies at least 1/4 of all graphene plasma in the UK. Graphene is a relatively new material with 200 times the strength of steel. It's light, potentially superconductive, and can be used in layers just 1 atom deep. Its applications are still being developed across sectors such as health, aerospace, and electronics. The takeover involves Taurus International and a Chinese scientist with industry links in China who already works with Perpetuous. Such interventions are rare, especially for smaller companies like Perpetuous.
Graphene is considered a wonder material as it's stronger than diamond and at the same time flexible like rubber. And it's one of the thinnest materials in the world. This material could revolutionize products in many areas, from computing to medical equipment and even to defense. A look now at surveillance cameras linked to human rights abuses in China. They are also used throughout the UK, including by the government's Department of Health. A Freedom of Information request reveals 45 Hikvision cameras are currently in use in the department's London building. NDD's Jane Worrell brings us this report.
The UK's Department of Health has fitted cameras from a company involved with major surveillance projects in the Xinjiang region's alleged re-education camps. A Freedom of Information request by NTD reveals the Department of Health building in London is currently using 45 cameras made by Hikvision, a firm blacklisted by the US as a potential threat to national security. The department said no Chinese companies have installed or run CCTV cameras in the building, and the camera that captured former Health Secretary Matt Hancock's affair was a different brand called Axis. However, it's previously been reported that Hikvision cameras are used in UK leisure centres, schools and council buildings. The UK's Foreign Affairs Committee this July published a report titled Never Again, the UK's responsibility to act on atrocities in Xinjiang and beyond. In it, the committee recommends the government forbid surveillance companies like Hikvision from operating in the UK. Former Security Minister and former head of the Royal Navy, Lord West of Spithead, says the use of these cameras is concerning. Hikvision has previously stated it is committed to human rights and they don't have access to devices without users' authorisation. The Department of Health didn't respond in time for deadline. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
A coup happening in West Africa may have Beijing worried. Aluminum prices rose on Monday after reports of an overthrow in Guinea. The news triggered concerns about supply chains there. In particular, that the supply of bauxite, the raw material used to make aluminum, could be interrupted. Guinea produces about a quarter of the world's bauxite and is China's top supplier. African bauxite prices have since hit their highest level in China in almost 18 months. though there's no sign of supply disruption. A military spokesman said Monday that the country had reopened its borders a day after soldiers dissolved the government. Aluminum prices have risen by about 40% so far this year. And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.